Hey y'all, here OS Reviews. Today we're taking a quick look at the OT-VOOC VOOCBook 15. This is a 15.6-inch laptop running on Windows 11 that's priced a little bit north of $350, making it a mid-tier laptop. It has a 11th gen Intel N5100 processor, which is quad-core. It's also packing 16 gigs of built-in RAM, along with a relatively large touchpad, a Full HD IPS display, coupled with 512 gigabytes of built-in SSD, USB Type-C port, up to 300 nits for the brightness of that display, and also a relatively decent 8500 milliamp hour capacity battery. There's a SATA slot which you can use to expand the built-in SSD, supporting up to 4 TBs for additional storage, and it does come with the standard dual-band 2.5G 5G Wi-Fi along with built-in Bluetooth 5.0. That Jasper Lake 10 nanometer chipset on here, it's a good mix between energy efficient as part of the Intel Pentium Silver / Celeron line, but at the same time still getting you decent performance compared to past generations. And then on the inside we have access to, of course, the laptop itself that we'll be taking a closer look at in a moment. Other contents include just a quick user guide along with the AC adapter, which is using a barrel plug to charge. Taking a closer look at the design of the VOOCBook 15, it is very clean. Although it resembles metal from afar, it is constructed out of a polycarbonate plastic, but there's not too much flex to it. You can press down, everything feels relatively firm, and definitely not too cheap, which is good. Otherwise, if we are looking at it from the edge, you can tell that it is relatively slim. On the left-hand spine, you find access to the AC adapter, USB 3.0, Type-A port, full-sized HDMI, which is awesome to see, supporting up to 4K video output. There is a USB Type-C slot, which is full-spec, meaning you can also use this to charge the laptop in addition to reading back data and transferring files. So it's great to find that you are able to choose between this or the barrel plug for charging. On the right-hand spine, there's access to a micro SD card reader, 2 more Type-A ports, one 2.0, one 3.0, standard 3.5mm auxiliary headphone jack, great to see, and also an Ethernet port. Now, because this laptop is so slim, in order to access that full port, you have to pull down on this lever, and then it gets you the size to plug in a standard jack. A little bit reminiscent of a MacBook, but still looks clean. And then, of course, we have just some soft touch rubber feet, ventilation grills. This machine, though, does have a fan that kicks in to prevent overheating, to kind of cool itself off, despite having an energy-efficient chipset. You also get some grills for the speakers, which come out here from the rear. It would have been nice to have it on the front, but again, it is what it is. The laptop here can't really be opened with one hand, as expected on most of the lower-cost units, but overall, we can flip it open and it presents us with a very generously sized touchpad. Measuring almost 6 inches diagonally, it's ginormous and something that you won't have any issues with in terms of size. Although it is a plastic trackpad, it is a precision touchpad. Otherwise, it feels decent in terms of the action. Again, the deck here is constructed out of a polycarbonate plastic, but still feels pretty firm without too much flexing going on. One thing that is a little bit funny, though, is if you look very closely on the left and right sides, what looks like these tiny little grills for the speakers, resembling what the MacBook has, these are actually decorative. In fact, there are no real grills. These are painted on to the surface. Would have preferred for them to just not have these on there at all, since the actual speakers are on the bottom there, but it is what it is. The keyboard, at the very least, is full-sized, it's island, chiclet, and pretty responsive and tactile. We also have access to a dedicated numpad on the edge, although a little bit more cramped. Still, it's a decent layout, and it gets comfortable when it comes to typing. Granted, the keyboard is not backlit. And up top, we have that beautiful 15.6-inch display, which is, again, IPS, 1080p. It's a pretty decent quality panel on a relatively affordable laptop with very generous viewing angles, albeit this is a glossy screen, meaning that it can cast a little bit more reflections if you're in direct sunlight, and it's also not a touch panel. But aside from that, again, very good, with minimal bezels here on the edges. The very top features the webcam, 2 megapixels, working just fine, although having something like a privacy shutter would have been a nice additional feature. It still works all right. Something that I do find to be kind of interesting is the texture that they've gone with for the bezels or the border here. If you look very closely, it has tiny grooves on it, kind of like a vinyl texture, and otherwise in terms of how far back the display goes, we can try that out here just by folding this thing, and you can see it's actually quite impressive. So if your child or someone accidentally pokes the display and shoves it back, it's not going to break on you. Inside, we're greeted to a very clean install of Windows 11. Taking around 8 seconds to turn on from a cold boot, everything is relatively fast and speedy when it comes to navigating around the UI, and you're still getting a decent, again, fluidity when it comes to checking out files and opening things up. Taking a look here in terms of the memory, by the way, out of the box, from the 512 SSD, you get around 443 gigs left after the operating system and updates have been installed. For quick web browsing as well as document editing, I was able to achieve close to the rated mark, around 7 hours in my testing, with indoor usage, the screen brightness being around 30%. Of course, if I crank that up, also start to watch 4K videos and do a little bit of gaming, that number will fall to around 4.5 to 5 hours, which is still decent for a 15.6-inch laptop. So all in all, not bad. The other thing to keep in mind here is despite having a fan, it is very quiet. In fact, it's almost imperceptible when you are using it. Take a quick look at some of the benchmark performances. I will point out that a lot of the past budget laptops that we've seen in the $200 price range have used chipsets like the Intel Celeron N3450, which is very common and has a passmark score a little bit north of 1,950, representing pretty much the lowest end performance that you can get these days that still is serviceable. And then a slight upgrade in other models that we've seen in the past has been the J4125. So in contrast, the Celeron N5100 has a 3,341 passmark score. So you are getting a little bit of a performance boost. In terms of using it in the day-to-day, everything still feels responsive enough that you don't get annoyed or you have to wait too long. So if we do a quick web browsing test, let's try to jump into something like The Verge, a pretty complex page, and you can tell here that first of all, Wi-Fi reception is quite strong. Although the presence of Wi-Fi 6 would have been even better, it is what it is, and at the least you get a pretty full reception thanks to the mostly plastic chassis, and even more complex pages like this maybe takes a split second to completely render, but afterwards you get a lot of overall details on this page. Things are still relatively smooth as I'm scrolling along. I can pinch in and pinch out with the touchpad and everything still feels responsive enough. The 16 gigs of RAM is also on the higher side for a budget laptop, meaning that you're able to do more multitasking without the system boggling down on you. More specifically, using Edge, I was able to open about 25 tabs and things still felt relatively smooth when it comes to jumping back and forth between them, including CNET, more complex web pages here with plenty of ads and videos. You can see that it's still doing all right. Other tasks, such as using it for document editing and for PowerPoints, schoolwork, office work, that's also something that you're not going to have any problems on this machine, which is not too surprising, considering that office work has been serviceable on lower-end devices for a while now. The 16 gigs of RAM also allows you to load up slightly larger documents than if you had one with only 4 or 8 gigs, for example. The same can be said if you're trying to do a little bit of coding, whether it's Jupyter Notebook that you want to run locally or Google Colab over the cloud, everything is still doing all right. Although local processing might be more limited if you're trying to run heavier programs, keeping in mind that it is just integrated graphics at the end of the day on a relatively entry-level chip as compared to something with a dedicated GPU if you're doing more machine learning related tasks. But for the general user, for a student, for homework, things like that, it still works just fine, really without any problems. Let's jump into media watching as another experience. We can try and bump the quality here up to 4K and see how it fares. I'm also going to pull up Stats for Nerds. Overall takeaway is that it does a good job in terms of streaming back content, such as 4K videos, as we can see there. It's buffering along just fine, very quick to load, and only 1 or 2 drop frames out of a couple of minutes of playback. So no issues here in terms of handling 4K streaming content. Again, the display here is also decent enough that you're able to enjoy the content with good viewing angles and colors. For watching back some YouTube clips or Netflix, it doesn't really pose an issue. Everything is working quite well. It doesn't sound as tinny as other budget laptops that we've seen in the past, so it even suffices in those cases for just listening some music very quickly, although headphones can always improve that experience even more. Doing some Photoshop or editing, it certainly suffices for lighter tasks like that. Even stitching together shorter clips, for example, if you're editing something in 1080p, roughly a 5-minute clip will take around 2 to 3 minutes to export, which is not too bad either. as long as you aren't really a pro video editor, for instance. And of course, as a full-blown Windows computer, you're able to install all the legacy programs and apps, any executables, drivers that you have online, and of course that's the beauty compared to a mobile OS, is you get more software support. Final remarks here, in terms of doing a bit of light gaming, it also will suffice, usually getting a decent frame rate for lighter titles or games which have been released a few years back, as long as you aren't pressing it too hard in terms of graphic settings. So although I wouldn't consider this a gaming laptop per se, if you slightly lower some of the settings, everything is still playable, as long as you aren't expecting miracles, that is. And you can always leverage cloud gaming through services like xCloud. If you want to play more demanding games or have larger storage on bigger titles, you're able to stream that online, acting as a portal in those instances. So that is more or less it as far as our quick hands-on review of the VOOCBOOK 15. This laptop is really competing with alternatives from brands like Chewy, along other mid-tier laptops in this price range, and it does a fair job in terms of delivering a relatively up-to-date experience. The UI feels fast and responsive enough to hop around, open up different programs. You get a decent processing experience that watching back videos up to 4K resolution, doing some light Photoshop, doesn't prove to be too demanding for this machine to handle, and overall it's a pretty well-balanced unit with a decent battery life to boost as well. You can check out additional details if you're interested in the links down below, but for now that's been our video. Thanks for watching here at OS Reviews. That's been the VOOCBOOK 15.